Good morning, everyone. I am Deanna Bick. I'm the head of global engagement of Santa Fe Farms, and welcome to our live South by Southwest conversation, where you get a chance to ask your questions about the potentials and the pitfalls of investing in the hemp market. This is a chance for us to not only share some critical lessons learned in hemp investment, but to share some insider looks at to where and how to invest effectively. We will, of course, be taking questions from the audience, so please submit your questions in the Zoom toolbar in the chat toolbar, and we'll get to as many as possible. But first, I'm going to introduce our panelists this morning. We have a great group of panelists, and I'm going to begin with Stephen Gluckstern. Stephen is the chairman and CEO of Santa Fe Farms, which is a fully integrated industrial and curated hemp operation. With over 35 years of business experience, ranging from founding startups to managing multi-billion-dollar corporations, Stephen has previously served as CEO, chairman, and board member of public and private companies, as well as numerous non-for-profit and government organizations. We also have with us Kim Kovacs. Kim is the CEO of the Arcview Group. Kim has over 20 years of executive leadership and experience across technology services and investment companies. As founder and CEO of MyJane, Kim built a cannabis wellness technology platform, which was acquired in January of 2019 by Manifest 7. She founded or co-founded 6 additional companies and raised more than $100 million in equity capital, and has been an active angel investor for more than 10 years. Jeanne Sullivan is the Chief Investment Officer of the Arcview Ventures. Jeanne is a co-founder of New York City-based venture capital firm and longtime tech investor. She serves on the team of the Arcview Group, an organization that has built a community of cannabis investors and business owners and the membership has invested more than $300 million in just about every cannabis company out there. Jeanne also serves as the Chief Investment Officer and is building Arcview Ventures, an entity formed to provide several cannabis investment platforms under the Arcview umbrella. Welcome, everybody. It looks like we may have lost Stephen. So I'm going to start with Jeanne and Kim, and I'm going to just ask you a quick icebreaker question. We're going to have a lot of fun here today, and hopefully Stephen will be able to join back in. So Jeanne, I have a quick question for you. What's something that people may not know about you that may be a little surprising that they can't read about you on Google or the internet?
Thank you, Deanna, for your introduction and for today's discussion. So in my next life, I am going to go to medical school and teach people about the endocannabinoid system. But then after that, I'm going to be a professional golfer on the tour. I have 3 brothers who are all single index players, so I actually believe it's in my DNA to be a great golfer.
That's fantastic. Kim, I'm going to ask you the same question. What's something surprising that people don't know about you?
So I would say there's maybe 2 things. One is that I used to do long distance swimming. And so I would get up really early. I do a master's class, and I used to swim about 3 miles every time I'd go in between. And I lived in San Diego, so I swam La Jolla Cove. And one year I actually saved a kid from drowning, and it was great that I knew how to swim. And so I felt really confident, getting in the water and kind of bringing him back to shore. He was on a raft that was deflating quickly. And so we were able to do that. And then my second one is, Jeanne, I love your second life. I feel like I need a second life, especially after being in cannabis. But one of the things that are just so impressive for me as a young kid, I got to work with Ingrid Croce, and her husband was Jim Croce, the famous singer-songwriter who died in a plane crash. And she was my mentor. She was my first entrepreneur, my first love of being an entrepreneur. And I was her CFO at the age of 24 years old.
Oh, that's incredible.
That's pre-internet, Deanna, so you can't find that anywhere.
That's incredible. And speaking of internet, I just heard that Stephen's internet went down, unfortunately. So I'm going to punt for Stephen, and I'm actually going to take the first question that I was going to ask him. And I was going to ask Stephen that everybody's heard about hemp, and they often confuse the difference between hemp and cannabis. And I was going to ask him to give us a primer on the difference. So I just want to explain that, and then I'm going to shoot back to you guys. So basically, hemp and cannabis come from the same plant, which is Cannabis sativa. But really the difference between hemp and cannabis is that hemp has no psychoactive properties. It has below 0.3 THC. So when we grow hemp and cannabis, the difference is that we grow one genetically reprogrammed. Oh, Stephen's back. We grow one to be genetically programmed, have THC in it, and we grow one to be genetically programmed not to have THC. Stephen, welcome back. I was just starting to explore the difference between hemp and cannabis, but I'm going to throw this back to you. Stephen, I was just saying that that hemp and cannabis are the same plant, but people often confuse them. Do you want to expand on that?
Sure, and I apologize. Just as we started, my internet died. That's now twice in 2 weeks. Sure. The hemp plant is obviously the cannabis plant, and basically how it's bred will determine how it expresses itself. And obviously, historically, the focus over the last 50 or 60 years has been on the flower, where THC and the other sort of cannabinoids develop. Although what we now know about industrial hemp is that the rest of the plant is incredibly valuable. The plant's been around for 8,000 years. And the fiber, which comes from essentially what you consider the bark of the plant, and the hurd or shib, which comes from the internal part of the plant, have tremendous other uses. And we're just beginning to understand how extensive those uses really are.
Thank you. So while you were gone, I had the opportunity to ask both Kim and Jeanne a question about something surprising about them that people may not know about them, that people can't find on the internet. And I'm going to go ahead and ask you the same question.
Oh, wow. Sure. I'd say one of the things that you'd have to look really hard to find out on the internet is that my family and I are longtime burners and have gone to Burning Man for many, many years. My children who are in their 30s and 40s, it's our family vacation. And we are part of the management of one of the largest and best known camps at Burning Man.
Well, now that we know that you're a burner, that Jeanne's a secret pro golfer, and that Kim saves lives in her spare time, we're going to have a great conversation this morning.
Even I always knew you were cool. Now I really know it. That's a great story.
Well, you'll have to come. You'll have to come sometime.
They may be having it this year, I hear. We'll see.
Yeah. Yes, this is another topic, another time. It's an interesting question of whether or not it's really appropriate to have it this year, but we'll save that for another discussion.
There you go.
So Stephen, I'm going to start with you. So what do you think the opportunities are for investors when we focus on the future of the hemp industry?
So I think there are extraordinary opportunities, and I think in many, many different ways and in different areas. Whether you want to, focus on health and wellness products that are based on cannabinoids, whether you want to look at industrial hemp in areas such as animal feed and animal bedding, whether you are interested in, I'll take the most simplest one of all. We still make paper out of trees. It makes no sense to make paper out of trees. And someone is, I think, going to develop ways to be able to really do it at scale and size and hemp. And so I think as an investor, you have a tremendous, there's one of my friends likes to use the word plethora of opportunities, and those can be either specific or large scale. There are companies like ours that are trying to build, the entire value chain. So I think there's an unlimited amount of opportunity.
Excellent. And Jeanne, do you think that the market's ready for large scale investment, or do you think it's still too volatile?
I love meeting companies, and I've seen 1,000 companies and across a variety of both hemp and cannabis companies. But after such visit, I often share with my partners and other investors that I'm doing business with that we just saw a team, a dream, a PowerPoint, and then I ask them if they even own a dog, and they say no dog. So everything is early, everything's nascent, but that doesn't mean there is an opportunity. There's enormous opportunity by understanding the gaps and how to learning the business, being smart about that, looking left and right and out over time. I often speak about luck. Luck is being aware of what's going on and then seizing the moment. this is a great time to start seizing the moment, even though it's fraught with issues. You got to know what you're doing, and that's one of the secrets to unlock.
And Kim, what do you think the timeline is before investors can see a strong return on their investments?
Well, Deanna, as we saw with sort of the cannabis bubble and burst, and maybe there's another bubble coming, and we've got SPACs, and we've got, a lot of things that people are looking at in the investment community right now with regard to hemp and investing in hemp. And I would just say, be careful and look at the long view. Industries are not built overnight. They take time, they take thoughtfulness, and they take a significant amount of capital. I think it was Henry Ford, when he first came out with his automobile, he wanted to go to California, but there was no highway. And so those need to be built, and we need to really look at this as a true industry and have an industrial revolution. So I'd say go in for the long game. Don't expect a quick flip, 18 months, 24 months. We saw that early days of cannabis, and we also saw the burst of that, right? The repercussions of that. And, because hemp is legal in at least the federal government in the United States, there are so many opportunities to invest, right? That don't exist in the THC world. And so, I think it's fantastic to get in, but yeah, it's a long game.
So Kim, just keying off of what you just suggested and mentioning Henry Ford, did you realize that Henry Ford was one of the first usage of bioplastics? I'm fascinated to learn that. Even biofuels he figured out could be useful. And so using hemp in batteries because it has a supercapacitor ability, I'm fascinated to learn this. Plus, how could we as a country not even allow hemp after, first usage when farmers were commanded to grow hemp? How could we disallow it and only allow importation of other countries' hemp? This is complete craziness that it wasn't allowed here, but we were allowed to import and use. Go figure that out, somebody.
Wasn't it William Randolph Hearst?
Did not want to be, taken over by hemp paper. How crazy is this? Have we awakened yet? That's what I'd like to ask.
It's true.
I think Stephen can answer that awakening question.
Yeah, more. No, I think. Well, I think we're awake. I mean, obviously, the history of it's a form of prohibition. There's a crazy history here, right? And how this plant and an industry that had developed over many years. Abraham Lincoln was a hemp farmer. We can go down the long list of the Declaration of Independence. Several copies are on hemp paper. We can go look at its history. And in the 30s, a number of the powerful, in particular, timber businesses really didn't want to see the competition that they knew hemp could provide them. And by the way, they hid behind the reefer madness argument and supported that argument, and that it lasted for 90 years. And it really wasn't until 2010, 2014 that people began to say it doesn't really make sense. And so we sort of had this hiatus, right? Like growth interrupted or something. And only now, I mean, that's one of the reasons that, as we've talked about, why there's so much activity in a brand new industry. There's, we had 90 years of no research, right? There was no research that was done on this plant and the genetics and all of its other uses. And I think, Jeanne, as you mentioned, I think we're just beginning to touch on, in particular, this question that you gave, the argument of introduced this idea of batteries and supercapacitors. It turns out that if you take hemp and you pyrolyze it correctly, it produces a whole series of advanced carbons. And we're just beginning to understand what those are, how they can be used, that have dramatic effect, not just in terms of reducing costs, but reducing emissions and many other things. And that's, to me, from an investment perspective, why this is such a fascinating industry.
So, and Deanna, to pick up too on what you asked about its nascency, there's a famous quote. Troy Dayton would often say this: pioneers get slaughtered, but settlers get rich. So I love the idea, which we were talking about, Stephen, that, the early gold miners, forged their way across the US to the West to do that. But then many said, I'm not going till the railroad's built. Well, guess what? The railroad ain't built yet. And so I've thought back because one thing I'm proud of, and maybe this is really my thing that maybe you couldn't see readily on the internet if you look me up. I have the gift of being early in many areas. We were the only VC back in the day to really say cloud-based computing. This is late 90s kind of discussion. So that's pretty exciting. And why is that? It's because for years, I was going to critical conferences. Esther Dyson put on a conference for many years where the luminaries from the tech world talked about cloud-based computing as the long tail. So when we forged our fund back in the late 90s, we knew to look for that. So that's where luck matches with opportunity, just being aware and knowing. I say the same thing here because in the earliest days of cannabis, which I'm pleased to have played in, it's a matter of seeing the gaps, understanding what the heck's going on and going for it, taking that risk. It does take risk taking to invest in or first study and then invest in these nascent industries and companies. But I believe knowledge is the way to do it, as well as aligning yourself with other smart people with great domain experience. That's really the secret.
So I love what you're saying here, Jeanne, and I'm going to push you all a little bit on this very topic. But before I do, I want to remind the audience to please put your questions in the Zoom chat for us. So let's get back to this. So there are so many other products that are possible that can be derived from industrial hemp. And I want to go into this. And I think, Stephen, this is an area that you can address. And I'd love, Kim and Jeanne, your feedback on this as well. If we were going to invest into some of these areas, what would this look like? I've heard of, there's biochar and animal feed and battery storage devices. And can you talk about this and the possible opportunities for investment?
Sure, I'll start, but I'll even go one step earlier than all of those. I think that one of the biggest challenges the world is facing, and this is not news to anybody, is the climate crisis. And the climate crisis is primarily driven by the fact that we are putting too much CO2 in the air. It's not the only issue, but it's certainly one of the primary issues. And you can see everywhere you look now, focus on what kinds of businesses, what kinds of opportunities are there to reduce carbon. And we're talking about a carbon neutral country in a carbon neutral world based on the Paris Climate Accords at 2050. Today we put about 50 gigatons of CO2 net into the atmosphere. That's, by the way, many, many times what we've ever done before. And that's only as a result of human activity, by the way. The question is, how do you get to carbon neutrality? Well, you do a lot of things to become more efficient. And I was telling the story yesterday that I was flying on United Airlines, and their CEO came on board in the back of the seat in front of me talking about how the United was committed to becoming carbon neutral. So we're seeing businesses all over the world beginning to think about this as a major focus. Hemp is a unique plant. Hemp sequesters more carbon, more CO2 per pound of hemp produced than any other biological that we know of. There may be others. And so I think there's going to be a huge opportunity in the carbon credit world and in hemp's contribution to helping us manage that last mile of, we can sequester, we can design better and better industrial systems. They can produce less and less CO2. But the point is we all exhale CO2 and plants only can take in so much. So I think if I were looking in the long run, I think there are going to be some huge opportunities, even before we talk about the products. It may make sense to grow hemp and let it rot in the field rather than even have to use it by its CO2. You really can't let it rot in the field because it puts the CO2 back in the air. But it may be that hemp grown solely for the purpose of carbon sequestration may be an interesting investment opportunity.
Fabulous.
You know what, to talk not just about investment, but also let's talk about human capital investment. So my daughter is getting her degree this May. She'll be graduating with an environmental engineering degree, and they haven't talked about hemp at all in her classes. And so she's actually doing her final paper for graduation about industrial hemp. and biochar and various other things, and really introducing it. Because she said they haven't talked about it at all. And so I think there's something really important to understand here, which you guys have been talking about. This is nascent, right? We're really starting on the very early stage of this. It's only been legal for a few years now, but we need that education, and we need to start really, learning about this earlier. And we can't wait till, people get their degrees and then they're off in their careers and then they stumble upon hemp and in cannabis like I did, and really understanding, all of this and putting it back in the research and get that done. So I would just kind of say to anyone out here who is, looking for a new career or looking to get into something that is going to be extremely impactful for the next umpteen generations, to really start looking at this plant. And diving in and crossing over from other industries that you might be in right now.
Sure. And to add to that list, the world of textiles, we're very interested in that.
Mm-hmm.
But again, we don't even have the infrastructure to scalably do those hemp textiles. Animal feed, I understand it's not even allowed yet to be sold, and yet there's great nutritional benefits. Isn't that right, Stephen and Deanna, on animal feed? Is this crazy or what? But humans can take in properties off of hemp CBD, but animals can't. So go figure that out. The whole batteries area, as we talked about, the building materials, I love that. We've seen several companies, but they're early stage, nascent, and the whole distribution channel piece, the whole supply chain, it's far from built. Again, I want to point out, that doesn't mean you pass. It means you learn, you sidle up with others who have even more domain knowledge and experience, and then you find great dynamic teams who know what to do and how to do it. That's the one-liner that I've used my whole life to figure out, is this team worthy of our investment dollars?
Yeah, Jeanne, I think you mentioned something I think that's really important. We haven't really touched on very much yet, and that's the building products question. The construction industry is a major contributor, by the way, to the climate crisis. But more importantly, we continue to, cut down trees to create timber. And hemp is a product that can, over time, in many cases, replace timber. Our company is looking very carefully at design of several different kinds of building materials. Interestingly enough, if you build a house out of hemp, and there are different ways of doing that, that house acts, not only does it in the production of the materials themselves, but that house then is actively sequestering carbon. And that's a radical change. That kind of notion can change enormously from an investment perspective, how we think about buildings, how we build them, what we build them with, what does a green community really look like? So, I'm with you in that it is the very beginning of what will be a major industry in the United States and in the world.
I absolutely agree. And Kim, you brought up an incredible point before about education, which I'm going to get back to in a second, but I'm going to pivot here for a moment. And I'm going to ask you all a question, and I'm going to start with you, Stephen. We've all heard about ESG investing. Can you tell me why hemp could be a great investment in this area?
Sure. So it's funny, ESG has been around for a long time, but no one's really paid too much attention to it. It was sort of viewed as a little backwater. And now I think major institutions, all the pension funds, people begin to say, wait a second, it's not just, who has the greatest bottom line, but it's who has the greatest bottom line while at the same time not damaging the world in which we live. And certainly from the E part of the environment, we talked a little bit about carbon and hemp's ability to replace timber and various activities. So tremendous opportunity there. The S part's very interesting, right? This is the social, you read a lot in the cannabis and hemp space about the fact that, the Black and brown communities in our society have borne the brunt of the ridiculous legislation that we've had. And that as we look at building an industry, wanting to make sure opportunities existed for those communities who basically got beaten up in the system, and making sure that small entrepreneurs and in the urban areas can participate. At Santa Fe, we're looking at some other things as well. We believe that this may be a unique opportunity for Native Americans and for the First Nations in Canada, because we can talk a lot about the history of what we did to Native Americans when this country was formed. But one of the things that Native Americans have is 50 million acres in the United States. And so I'm very interested in exploring ideas, we'll call it the S of the ESG, that relate to what we can do to help those communities. And perhaps, we've joked a little bit that, the Indians and Native Americans were given, alcohol, tobacco, and gambling, 3 sins. And maybe, just maybe, carbon and hemp should be the 4th, and they could lead us in that art. So we're at our firm, very conscious of the S part. G is just about good governance, obviously, and running companies in a way that are appropriate and balanced. And so I think there are big opportunities in ESG investing. And if investors look carefully, you'll find people who are doing really interesting and creative things in that regard.
Yes, let me pick up on that, Deanna. I think people will enjoy hearing this. First of all, ESG, environmental, social, and governance, as Stephen was saying. But I went back to really figure out what are the origins, because more than 15 years ago, when I was investing pure tech, I saw teams that had, let's say, data platforms tracking that. And people are still going like, what? Rolling their eyes. And I really feel like it took recent years, maybe the carbon piece, maybe, well, let me tell you what happened. Back in 2004, it was Kofi Annan, the former head of the UN, that actually had the brainiac idea to pull together 50 CEOs in the financial services world. So what's exciting that I think has brought ESG, whoops, we have a sound issue. What brought ESG into full force in recent days, years, has been tying it to financial metrics. That changed the game because these 50 CEOs with powerful companies globally came out with a very important paper called Who Cares Wins. That drew the attention, and that then got picked up by NYSE, the New York Stock Exchange, into this PRI report. I find all that really fascinating. Principles for Responsible Investment. This became a catalyst for large companies to adopt that, but more than just some of the things we're talking about. This is where I'm fascinated. It touches on culture in a company. It responds to this climate change that companies need to have. What about how you treat one's worker? What about building trust and fostering innovation? What about the supply chain and the components within the supply chain to do sustainable efforts? So I find it fascinating that it started in the UN, prospered then by this global financial world. That's what's bringing it into full alignment. So people are paying attention finally.
So Jeanne, on top of that, there's also an organization, and we can put this in the chat, or it's pretty easy to remember. It's SASB.org. And so it's a sustainability board. So if you think of the Financial Accounting Standards Board, that's FASB.
Sure.
And so in order to hold corporations accountable for their accounting practices, right, to ensure that there's consistency across the board in reading financial statements in the financial markets, the FASB implemented rules, right? We have rules and an audit around those rules of how people account for things. So different categories and different deductions and different ways and means of presenting your financials. So there's consistency. There's a level playing field there. SASB is doing the exact same thing with sustainability. And so what's really interesting about this is that the corporations have now started to, develop standards so we can measure each other on who's doing what and what true measurements look like. So I think, they're hand in hand, right? There's the desire to have, less carbon and doing all these things and sustainable environments and even social equity and justice programs. But how do you measure success? Well, with SASB, you can do this now. And if you look at the list and roster of companies on there, it's really spectacular. And to your point, Jeanne, I think, a lot of us were early in sustainability. I mean, my first company was in 1998, 1999, and I had to go and teach CARB, the California Air Resource Board, what it meant to reduce emissions without having to, manufacture things differently. Like you could add things to, fuel additives and things along those lines. And so back to education again, all of these things work together. We can't have one without the other. And so like I said, I just encourage everybody to really start.
Yeah, it's worth just without going into too much history. When I went to business school, the world was just changing. Those of us who were, grew up in the 60s believed in sort of a balanced and fair world, and we're by the time Reagan came into power in 1980, all of a sudden the world began to look at maximizing shareholder wealth as the purpose of corporations. And that became the sole measure. And the answer, therefore, was do whatever you needed to do to maximize the returns for your shareholders. We now live in a world that has suffered through that. That process cost us dramatically in our environment, socially, in almost every way. The gap between CEO pay today and CEO pay 40 years ago, all of those things, elements. And I do think the tide is changing. As Jeanne and as you mentioned, that all of a sudden people are recognizing that may not be the highest and best form of capitalism, and that capitalism left unchecked in that kind of way can create a society that looks unfortunately like the society we have today. And it's time now to try to rebalance that. Not that shareholder returns aren't really important. They really are. That's how capital is generated. But that has to be balanced against a set of society that we all want to live in and we can all survive in.
You know what? There was a question posted about social equity programs and racial equality, right? And I'd like to step out of the United States for just a second. So we participated in this thing called Global Hemp Day last year. And it was really an eye-opening experience to see how global hemp production and adoption can really pull really impoverished communities across the globe into self-sustaining. And there was a gentleman there from Zimbabwe, and he was talking about first they had to change the mindset that hemp was going to get you high, right? That it was cannabis and, this war on drugs, like, reefer madness and all that. He says, as soon as we get this done, then the villages could literally start growing hemp to feed themselves, clothe themselves, and build their homes. They don't need support from the outside anymore. And it was such an amazing, right? You don't have to, give the man the fish anymore. And it was just so powerful. And we're not there yet, but those kinds of things. So talk about racial equality, right? And being able to have these places that have been so impoverished for so long to now be self-sustaining, like the indigenous tribes, Stephen. That's why I'm going to follow you to the ends of the earth, because I think this is one of the most important things we can do here in the United States, is to finally create social equity programs for the indigenous people that we've been lacking for the best word I can find without swearing, over this last, 200-300 years.
A great point, Kim. And I'm going to pivot back to the education for a second, because, we all need to be better educated as investors and as participants in this industry. So I want to ask you a question, and this is kind of to all of you. In a perfect world, as a nascent industry, there's so much to learn, even about hemp and about, everything that the derivatives of hemp and advanced carbons. What would you like to see in a perfect world about how we can change our approach to education to make us better participants in this arena, both as investors and even participants in the industry? How can we better educate? How can we provide, how can we, ensure that our engineers have opportunities to learn about hemp? How can we encourage our universities to educate people on endocannabinoid systems? Or do we have any
I see the proxies.
on that?
I see the proxies out there, just like Kim explained, that they're not even teaching about hemp or industrial hemp in a college setting, just like they're not teaching the endocannabinoid system in medical schools. Mm-hmm. This is complete craziness. And that's why there's fewer than we'd like physicians practicing cannabis medicine, why we're not doing the research, although that is finally starting. So it has to start early on in our great institutions and teaching the way, showing young people both the opportunities as scientists, inventors, business owners, investors, turning on their creative minds to what could be. That's a great place to start. But I look back to how I learned anything in these nascent areas that I figured out. I seem to, as I said earlier, lucky enough to be early in several different big opportunities. And it's by just reading voraciously, going and attending as many events as possible, meeting with companies and entrepreneurs and business owners to learn. And then I've had mentors all along that were far more domain experts than I ever was, certainly in the early days, and learning from them what could be, what to stay away from, what to look for. And so certainly in our live person world, that was easier, because I know that for me, the Arcview Group's been a fabulous platform for that, because we've put on many events live over the years. These are big events. And then there's been many events in our business live. And now over the past year, certainly virtual, but there's plenty of education online, both through us as Arcview as well as many other groups. So that's the type of thing to tap into. And so now, with more and more emphasis on climate change, the ability for hemp to do its job around sequestering carbons, I know there'll be more and more education that both will do, and then many institutions. So tune in and learn that way. And then that may inspire inventiveness, as well as the door will be open to those of us who want to invest behind these business owners and entrepreneurs.
You know, Dia, it's sort of an interesting, because I even if look, it's the path to how I got to this industry versus others. But you know, back at the turn of the century in 1900, you know, 40% of the American population was employed in agriculture because we had to produce the food that we needed. And it was a hugely manual task at the time. And agriculture was on the tip of everybody's tongue because 4 of 10 adults worked in it. Roll forward to the last turn of the century in the year 2000. Turns out that it's less than 2% of our population is involved in agriculture. By the way, we produce so much food now that we export it on top of that. So there was this huge change. And by the way, technology that was the revolution. And so in the last 25 or 30 years, and Jeanne and others, technology dominated the headlines every place we go. That's all we ever learned about. What I knew about agriculture, you could put in one hand, right? But most of us, I'd say, about what it was, what was regenerative agriculture? How did we grow? How did we feed our population? What were the uses of these products? And I think now, in particular with the climate change driven by that issue, people are saying, wait a second, maybe we should pay more attention to what we do on the earth and what we do and how and what we've done. So I think there's a change here, a big and important change in that education. And that, you know, if we go back to what we teach kids in high school or in college or in grade school about, you know, the nature of the earth and what it is and how we have to take care of it and what it can produce, the incredible ability of this planet to sustain us and sustain many more than us. That education is now, there were people and there were organizations that fought for that from the very beginning who never failed. You know, Sequoia, there are a lot of people who basically fought for that. Most of us didn't pay a lot of attention to it, I would honestly tell you. Certainly in business school, no one ever talked about agriculture. I can tell you that. And
No way.
what we did.
Yeah.
So maybe that goes to this education piece, which is it just gets more embedded in what we do and what we talk about, and you know, and maybe, you know, ag tech, which is now the fancy word for it, you know, the cloud, maybe, you know, people are starting to talk about something other than just the pure technology that can be driven. You know, listen, and it doesn't hurt that one of the most powerful and richest men in the world in technology, in Bill Gates, has made the statement that, you know what, this is the real issue. It's not about technology, it's about the planet we live on.
Yeah. You know what? Hey, Stephen, can I add something to that? Because I like to be a little bit of a sort of a, you know, stir the drink a little bit, especially this early in the morning. You know what? We as an industry, we are creating an industry, right? Us here on this call, others that are really the pioneers and now the settlers. Let's do internship programs. Let's bring on the job training like many nascent industries got started. I mean, when the internet first started, there weren't classes that you could learn. There wasn't even a concept of computer science like when I went to, high school or college. I mean, I remember having my first Mac experience, in high school. That was pretty hilarious. So a lot of these things are, these pioneers and these settlers in these new industries taking the time, dedicating to training and promoting and educating this young workforce and providing opportunities, at these entry-level positions that will include internships and will include on-the-job training. And we take the time to do it because then when they go to their next gig, they're going to bring that with them. And then ultimately the universities, I think, will get smart and be like, oh shit, we got it. We have to do this. We have to now start, prepping these people for this particular industry because this is important. So I want to throw that challenge out there that let's do this as an industry. Let's make sure these people really get the education on the job that they need.
So Kim, it's a really good point. I mean, but I take some pride in my home state here of New Mexico. We are in conversation with several of the universities here to develop programs in hemp. We're going to be doing internships and working, and for that very reason, and we're describing it as a chance also for in our state to have another industry that can help support. This is an impoverished place, unfortunately, the state I live in. And so the idea here is that very much what you said, let's figure out a way to sort of embed that in everything we do. And education clearly is a piece of it.
Sure.
All right, we'll match you with that, Stephen. We're putting together a foundation for ESG here at Arcview. So this is breaking news. We're just approved that this week, and we're going to double down and really put our money where our mouth is. And part of that will be mentorship programs and internship programs and funding, NGOs and other nonprofits that will support this industry.
Right. And on the investment side, we are hard at work looking to an investment vehicle for ESG and industrial hemp type opportunities. And we're just thrilled to be making forays into this. And also, this may sound like I'm stating the obvious because there's been a lot of change, game changer in our in this past year of how we're doing business, being so online. But one of the things I do look forward to, and this is how I learned the tech world, as well as cannabis, certainly, is going to the big conferences where there are multiple vendors. And I have done this for 30 years, crawled around the perimeter of the floor first, because that's where the early stage companies are. They can't afford the big booth in the center of the room. And then, of course, my goal would always be to cover every company. At least learning names, understanding the company, asking them, well, what do you do and why and how? So that's a great learning tool, pretty hard to do online. But so that's going to be one of the benefits when we're all convening again, to crawl through, go to the wonderful conferences, and there are many, and learn that way. It's a great way to connect if you want to play in the industry and find those companies that might be right for you or help build something, fill the gap. That's one way to get a great liquidity and vet over time, is figure out the gap and build toward that.
By the way, I've seen Jeanne crawl around these conferences. That's an understatement. So Miss Sullivan here, when she walks in the room, commands it. So, everybody sees her. She's like the little Pied Piper walking through the conference. She's got a following.
You're kind, but that is a great way to learn and connect with resources and people in the business.
These are all really great points. And remember, you heard it here first about the Arcview mentorship program. So we're going to take you up on that.
Foundation.
The foundation.
You got it. Yep.
And I want to throw it out to the audience one more time. If you have any questions, please throw them into the Zoom chat. I'm going to ask you all about lessons learned. So what are the biggest lessons that you've learned for investors and who want to get into this hemp space?
So,
Well, go ahead, Stephen. You start.
No, what I was going to say is I don't know so much the lessons about the hemp space. It's so new, but I will tell you that as a long-term investor and having run several investment firms before I got into the hemp space, that you have to be willing to make mistakes. That if you look only for sure things, you'll end up buying US treasuries, and there's not much return in those. And so, and from an entrepreneur standpoint, you have to be willing to make the mistakes, get up, dust yourself off, and do it again. That, the thing that I would say, and I'd say the same for an investor too, perseverance is really important. whether you're an investor or an entrepreneur. So to me, and look, the early investors in the cannabis space, many of them got their heads handed to them. It's what happens. But don't be discouraged by that. You can be upset by that. No one likes to lose money, but I think this is an industry you want to stick with it. This is going to be a major industry in the world, and it'll take a few years to get there. As I guess Kim was saying, you got to have a little bit of a long view here. By the way, not a 30-year view, but not a 3-month view of what's happening. That's, to me, the lesson is don't be afraid to fail.
One of the great joys of being a longtime investor, even in other industries, is to develop that sense of pattern recognition. That's what I rely on. And people ask me all the time, how do you actually decide to pull the trigger on a company to invest, actually take your wallet out and invest? And for me, it has to be a connection between the brain and my instincts. When those are together, I know it's right. The brain goes and figures it out, understands the marketplace, what the heck's going on. Is it big or small? Are there 2 of these or 100 of these companies? You have to know that.
Mhm.
And then the gut, the instinct says, what kind of person is this CEO? Is he or she able to get the ball over the finish line? Or are they just telling me about all the product features and benefits? I want to hear the business of the business. That's critical. How are they going to execute and get it across? So I've had this very sacrilegious title of something I've done for many years, both in tech and now having a blast with that in this wonderful cannabis and hemp world. And I call it 5 stupid things that investors do over and over again. I have one for entrepreneurs too, because we are far from blameless on doing completely inane things. And the number one thing mistake is throwing money at companies that you know nothing about. Now, if you're lucky enough that the smartest person on the block has invested several $1 million and they have big domain expertise and they're one of your best friends, call that luck. Remember, I spoke about luck earlier, seizing the moment by understanding that this person has figured this out if you haven't. But I see investors for years, including today, just throwing money at companies where they don't have the knowledge, they haven't dug in. So I think that's critical. The second one is just way overpaying on valuation because we have this disease, the FOMO disease, and so we don't want to miss out. And so you might way overpay. Well, that might feel good till the company doesn't scale or doesn't quite meet the mark. And then there's a down round, and guess what? Everybody feels bad instead of good because they didn't do a building block approach. So those are my 2 favorite that I love to talk about. There's plenty more. There's 500, not 5, but I like to hone in on the 5 I see over and over again. And I love sharing them because I've made every one of these mistakes. So I'm a subject matter expert in how not to also. It takes, like you were saying, Stephen, the risk taking to fail. I feel like that's where you really do learn. Unfortunately, the school of hard knocks is a great teacher. That's if you're paying attention.
Well, I'll just mention 2 things: Napster, MySpace. So, if we took those as the only companies that were, pioneering, and we said, oh, we lost our money, forget about it, we wouldn't have what we have today. And so, like you're saying, Jeanne and Stephen, we're going to lose some money here. We're going to make some money here. But I think in the greater context of everything, we have such a huge opportunity. And, to me, it's really about the team and picking these companies like you guys. I mean, Santa Fe Farms, you guys are doing things the right way, right? You are building the team, building the infrastructure. You're in it for the long term. You've got your really eye set, down the road and what needs to be put in place today, building blocks, right, to get there. And to me, that's the most important thing that we can do, especially for any frontier industry like this.
So another really important metric to talk about, as Kim just said, the team, and yes, agree. In fact, I've written about this. I really believe, even though what I'm about to say is provocative, that the CEO is the most important person on the team. And sure, the person who built it said, well, what about me? And the person who is the dynamic strategic thinker says, well, what about me? And et cetera. But the CEO knows how to make things happen again look left, look right, look out over time. I think that's critical. And so that's important, but the number one thing alongside of that great CEO with that team that she has built is timing, because that is where I have made my biggest mistake. I can see the future. We can see the future, the four of us and our listening audience today. We understand. And in fact, if you never understood anything about industrial hemp before today, you understand now. It is the future. The size of the market is even much larger than even the cannabis products today over time, much larger. So that total available market, addressable market is critical to understand. But second of all, is the market ready for you? So I've invested both in tech and in cannabis, and then got outwitted by a smarter product that was much better, lower price point, lower COGS to develop and manufacture, that came right around because I couldn't see around the corner. So timing of what's going on is so important with that product. I was in early tech with big time blue chip VCs around the table. That product never did happen, but it did happen 10 or 15 years later, especially around mobile computing and pen-based computing. Sure, it happened, but not when we invested. So timing is critical. Again, a little luck comes into play there, but understanding the future is the critical piece to unlock that luck. When is it coming and who can produce that?
So Jeanne, this is a perfect segue from a question from our audience, which we really only have time for this one question, which is, if big brands want to participate in one of hemp's many byproducts of the industrial hemp area, either in wellness or in building products or infrastructure, are we ready? Are we operationally ready for this?
The quick answer is yes. Over the last 2 years, Kim and I are seeing, just because of the wonderful landscape from which we are able to look out our perch, non-cannabis companies and people now coming into the market. They are awake. They're saying, how can I play? How can I invent? How can I invest? And, let me at it, teach me, show me, consult me, tell me. So there's plenty of very wonderful companies and platforms that are now smart enough to give back those insights. And we're one of them. I'm proud of that. And so it's very exciting time.
I'm gonna, for fun, Jeanne, argue that I think what you just said is correct. However, I think there are some infrastructure pieces in our industry that are not quite there yet.
Sure.
Not that we don't know what we need to do, but before a major box store or before anyone comes in, they need to know they can get consistent product at consistent quality and the timing. They can't. And I tell the story to some of our farmers. If you have a 100-acre farm, you're not going to be supplying McDonald's or Costco. You can't, because they can't rely on a 100-acre farm. So we need some of the infrastructure systems. And we were talking the other day, for instance, one of the things that you need to be able to do is separate on a hemp plant. You've got to take the fiber from the herd. That requires a machine called a decorticator. And the reality is there are not enough decorticators yet in the United States, and there are none at the size that we'll need. So that's all going to come. It's not like there's some inventiveness yet and some innovation that we still need while those systems are there. I agree with you in the long run that we are ready to start having those conversations. But if someone said, can you produce me 10 million pounds of fiber every 2 weeks and consistent quality, I'd have to say, I can't. I don't know if the industry can. We will be able to, but maybe not today. Maybe not.
And therein lies the opportunity.
Right
there.
Well, and also, I was just going to say, large companies have recognized this sort of gap between, product readiness and, commercialization efforts and various things like this. And so a lot of them have started, investing in very early stage ideas. So when I was in, tech space, Flextronics, now called Flex, has their sketch to scale program where they literally sit down with engineers and help them design, entrepreneurs, help them get to a place of commercialization. And they're investing in this really, really early. So if we take a page out of those books and we say, hey, listen, big industry's been doing this now with labs. J&J's got their labs. You know, we spend a lot of money in research and development, plus the path to commercialization in many other industries. And let's do that now with hemp. So let's get these big companies to understand that hemp is a future for them. Let's get the J&J labs to start really putting the money into these early stage projects so that we can get to these commercializations. So we can have, you know, these large manufacturing processing plants in the right areas that we need. And it's not just on the backs of venture, right, or angel investors to do this, that we're really embracing the industry. And I think they just need to know that the door is open.
Fantastic. Okay. And as we wrap up, any last 30-second comments for our potential investors?
I'll just say, come to arcviewgroup.com. We've got a lot of different avenues to get educated, to meet really smart people like Miss Jeanne Sullivan over here, and to, you know, start, just write a check, get involved, you know, learn about the industry. Don't just sit on the sidelines, because then you're going to be wondering, why didn't I invest in Bitcoin 20 years ago? You know, I mean, you know, I hear this all the time, I missed out. You're not going to miss out. Just get started.
And so it's time for my favorite African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. So I think coupling your investing interest, your inventor interest, it's important to surround yourself with really smart people that can help you push through and make it happen.
Beautiful. Stephen?
You know, invest often and largely. But I think I just echo the Kim and Jean's sentiments, which is, you know, this is an enormous opportunity. There'll be bumps, but this is an enormous opportunity, and one, by the way, in which we can help change the planet and change the nature of social justice. There's a whole. This is not, to me, like someone's got a better mousetrap and will kill mouses more effectively. This is a chance to participate in an industry that will have a profound effect, not just on your wallet, but on the planet we live on.
Hey, and Stephen and Deanna, I want to say thank you. Thank you both for stepping into this space and creating this company, and really, like I said, taking the long view, because we need people like you to take that risk. So I just want to say thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I want to thank our panelists today, Jeanne Sullivan, Kim Kovacs, and Stephen Gluckstern. And on behalf of Santa Fe Farms and South by Southwest, thank you so much for joining us for this great conversation about hemp investment. And if you have any additional questions, you can always reach out to us at santafefarms.com or arcviewgroup.com. And be sure to check out all our other sessions on South by Southwest as we discuss sustainability in hemp and First Nations in hemp, and talk with Senator Ron Wyden about upcoming legislation. I want to thank you all today for being here. Have a great morning.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.